Welcome to the Many Adventures of Peter and Fee, Volume 1, Homecoming, by Kelvin Fernandez. Peter and Fee has budding communities across Reddit, Discord, Goodreads, Twitter, Facebook, and more, so I encourage you to seek out your comfort zone, join the conversation, and let me know what you thought of each chapter as you get through them. Since the series has just begun, the communities are small, so there's a good chance I will personally respond and we can have a discussion. I hope you enjoy listening to the adventures just as much as I enjoyed creating them. So without further ado, let's start the journey. The Many Adventures of Peter and Fee, Volume 1, Homecoming, Chapter 5, Tea Party for Two. The carriage's wheels trundled along the hard dirt road. A spotted orange thrush alighted on an overhanging elm, alone and out of place in the barren soil beneath. The bird cocked its head, intrigued by the cart, purposefully following the well-trod path, its driver fighting back sleep at the reins. Long red curtains were draped over the passenger's compartment, obscuring those within. A large beast with even larger ears, that the bird had never seen before, was depicted on every side of the drapery. The sun's pleasant warmth fell down upon the carriage, a mild breeze the only thing keeping their driver awake. Fee yawned loudly, stretching her hands high above her ears. She was not enjoying the dreary atmosphere behind the veil. The curtains did shield them from the heat, but also cast a pink tinge over everything within the compartment, which she enjoyed even less. "It's only until we reach the capital. Then we can raise the coverings," Jack said, watching Fee squirm. He was sitting opposite the little girl, studying her closely. Fee didn't fail to notice, but also didn't mind, since she was equally curious about him. Leaning back, his hands resting behind his head, the tattoos along his forearms were prominently displayed. On his left arm, snakes and spiders crawled up his wrist and past his elbow, stinging and biting their brothers. Along his right, a beautiful arrangement of birds and flowers of every shape covered his skin. When Fee peered closely, she saw little ants dotted all over the place, disappearing beneath his shirt. She wondered just how far the ink spread. "Why bother with this anyway?" Fee slapped the curtain, a cloud of dust rising where she struck. "The farther we are from the throne, those friendly towards the Queen become fewer and far between," Jack explained. "I'd rather not announce my presence until I can guarantee your safety." "There's a giant elephant painted on the side," she cried, exasperated. "Very discreet." "It shows she's watching, without revealing with which set of eyes," he said. "How much longer?" Fee sighed. "We should be able to see the city walls in about 20 minutes. Fee opened her mouth to speak, then shot a quick look at Peter. He was fast asleep under a blanket, propped up in the corner of the cart. The events of the past week had finally caught up to him, and he murmured something about taking a short nap before he passed out. Fee slumped down in her seat and extended her leg. She gave him a soft prod with her toe, but he didn't stir. Satisfied with his slumber, she pulled herself back up. Jack watched this exchange, bemused, as the little girl turned back to face him. "Is it true you can't lie?" she asked eagerly, speaking softly. Jack's puzzled expression broke into a grin. "You've been talking about me, I see." Fee kept silent, focused intently on him. "That is false. I am very capable of telling lies. However, I choose never to do so." "Never?" Fee asked. "Never anymore," he responded. "Why? What happened?" Jack paused for a moment, removing his hands from behind his head and leaning forward to cross them over his knees. "How about we make this interesting for both of us? I'll answer every question you have, but for every one you ask me, I get to ask one of you. I won't tell a lie if you don't either." "You wouldn't lie anyway," Fee cut in. "I could just sit in silence," he countered. Fee's brow furrowed. Peter was clear in his warning. "You cannot trust a word Jack says." "But you said he always tells the truth," she had shot back. "That doesn't mean he cannot shape the truth as he sees fit." Seeing her hesitation, Jack continued. "However, If you ask something of me that I am not at liberty to discuss, or would like to keep private, I will simply say, I prefer not to answer. Please feel free to do the same. Fee considered the conditions. She couldn't see how Jack could trick her. Plus, she was impatient to start, not wanting Peter to wake up and discover their game. Deciding his terms were fair, she agreed. All right, you can start, he said. Why don't you lie? Fee asked, again keeping her voice quiet. The Queen abhors liars, and wants her voice to always speak the truth. I'm happy to oblige, he responded. My turn. Where do you come from? Fee frowned, unsatisfied with his answer. Jack did not strike her as a man who would sacrifice his free will for anyone, queen or otherwise. And in return, he expected her to reveal her home? Well, she was not about to do that. I prefer not to answer, she said. As is your right, he conceded. You may go again. Fee was slightly taken aback. She did not expect him to give in so easily. Why do you work for the Queen? She asked. It was my father's dying wish. He very desperately believed it would take me further in life, Jack answered. Fee thought she saw a glisten in his eye, but it was gone a moment after. What about your parents? Can you tell me anything about them? Again, Fee contemplated her response. If there was one subject she wanted to discuss less than her home, it was her parents. Hanging her head with guilt, she muttered, I prefer not to answer. Jack gave her a knowing smile that transformed her guilt into frustration. You could ask me where we were before Mather's ship, or find out how high I can jump. But those are not subjects that interest me, he said simply. Fine then, Fee fumed. She sat there scowling with her arms crossed, brain working furiously to find a question she was sure he wouldn't want to answer. After nearly a minute of silence, it came to her. What were the documents about? The ones that were stolen from Mathers? Jack's smile fell. He hid his face behind his crossed fingers, so his eyes became the only window to discern his inner thoughts. Fee became acutely aware that their harmless game had taken a serious turn. Another minute passed in silence, this time with Fee waiting for Jack. When he finally spoke. I prefer not to answer, he said, bringing his hands back down. It was Fee's turn to break into a cheeky grin, but it was dashed by Jack's next words. But I will, if you'll promise to give a real answer to my next question. Fee's knees began to shake absent-mindedly. Her bobbing sent slight tremors through the carriage as she deliberated. What did she care about the documents really? She had no interest in them. She had only wanted to make Jack sweat. But his hesitation had piqued her curiosity, and truth be told, she didn't believe any of her secrets were worth hiding. Except, of course. You can't ask me about my home again, or my parents, she stipulated. Fair enough, Jack said. And your answer can't be something lame, she added quickly. The information is top secret, and I definitely should not be revealing its contents to anyone other than the Queen. Okay, deal. Spill it. The documents are a transcript, Jack stated. A correspondence between King Aberon of Meridel and King Hefeo of Bartai, secretly copied and smuggled out of King Aberon's estate. In it, we expect to discover the whereabouts of an artifact, hidden for centuries, that the Queen would like to have for her personal collection. That's it? Fee sighed. Her shoulders sagged at the boring revelation. What's not lame about that? We believe the artifact in question was the true cause of the last Mage War ending so abruptly. Fee rolled her eyes, unimpressed. She had to admit, the information was probably very important to someone, but she couldn't have cared less. And now, it was her turn to answer. I surmise that you're unsatisfied, Jack said. I'm sorry to disappoint, but if it's any consolation, I very well expect to be let down by your answer as well. Fee waited, no clue what the man was about to ask. How far along is Peter on his quest? Fee blinked. That's not a question about me. No, but those were not the rules. Why don't you just ask him? Because he isn't beholden to the same veracity as you are now. Fee crossed her arms. The truth was nothing special, but it wasn't her truth to tell. Peter would scold her something awful if he found out what she had gotten herself into, especially given his warning. She considered lying. Her loyalty to the rules was thin, but unfortunately, she had also made a promise. Fee blew her regrets into the air and answered, I don't know. I guess nowhere at all. Jack leaned back in his seat, content with her honesty, if not her response. Unfortunate, but unsurprising. Just then, the driver poked his head in through the curtain. We'll be passing through the gate in a moment, sir. Thank you, Morris, Jack said, as he disappeared back beyond the curtain. Turning to Fee, he saw the girl was still hung up on the question. You should probably wake him up now, he said, nodding towards their slumbering companion. Fee slid down the seat, planning to shake Peter awake, then opted against it. Feeling guilty for what she had revealed, she instead leaned over and drew the curtains, letting the sun finally shine through as the stale air rapidly escaped. Peter groaned, turning his back towards the light, and drawing his blanket closer against the breeze. His eyelids lifted briefly, a sliver of green peeking through before slamming shut once again. Fee grabbed the blanket, and with a firm tug, yanked it from Peter's grasp, his angry protest unintelligible in his haze of sleep. Wake up, sleepyhead, she chuckled. You might want to close the curtains until we get inside the city, Jack cautioned. Why? Fee asked, already busy drawing the curtain on the other side. Don't tell me we're still not safe. We're safe enough. It's just that it won't be the most pleasant of views, he said. Fee gave him a curious look. Ignoring his advice, she stuck her head full out the window to discover his meaning. The wails reached her ears before the sight met her eyes. 100 cries battled for dominance, each mangled by 10 others. But despite the garbled message, the tone came through loud and clear. Despair. As their carriage conquered the final hill, the city wall came into full view. The stone brick rose tall, ending in jagged battlements 20 feet above the ground. A slight curve at either end indicated the wall extended around the entire perimeter of the capital. Thick wooden beams were affixed horizontally along the wall in 3 distinct lines. Atop each beam, hundreds of statues stood in formation, each splayed out in a unique, grotesque pose. At least, Fee had thought they were statues. A sharp gasp caught in her throat. Her eyes became horrified saucers at the realization of where the cries were coming from. The statues were alive. Human beings of every shape, size, and color decorated the wall. Iron rungs, driven into the stone, held their heads and limbs in place at varying angles. An old white man, with his hands stretched above his head, stood next to a black man whose body bent dangerously at the waist, who stood next to a frail woman whose legs were crossed below her as if floating above the ground. One man even stood backwards, his face pressed against the wall. As the carriage drew near, Fee could see that not all of them were actually alive. In fact, most of the statues stood slumped in their brackets, long since passed away. Carrion crows sat picking away at their flesh, the foul smell of their rotting corpses permeating through the air in the hot sun. A skeleton stood undisturbed amidst the crowd, picked clean, never to be heard from again. Those still with voice, however, were milking every last note they had left. At the sight of the carriage, with its royal red curtains, the statues burst into a fevered outcry. Shouts of rage collided with pleas of forgiveness as men and women cried out in desperation. The backwards man added his part to the cacophony, his voice muffled against the stone. It's not our most featured attraction. Peter had finally woken up and joined Fee at the carriage window. You lived here? Fee asked, astonished. For the first 12 years of my life, yeah. The people here have all crossed the Queen one way or another, and it's made clear to all what the punishment is. As long as you keep your head down, you can lead a fairly uneventful life. They are all criminals, Fee, Jack added, not bothering to get up from his seat. The cart had pulled up to the edge of the city, at a wrought iron gate, stretching to half the height of the wall. A lacquered plaque, nailed above the gate, read, Parsol, West Entrance. An attendant appeared behind the gate. The driver stepped down and handed him a letter through the bars. The man took one look at the seal and hurriedly shouted for the gate to be opened. As the iron bars rose into an unseen crevice within the wall, Jack joined the two at the window to take in the city. But before the carriage could move, he held his hand up to the driver to wait. A wheezing cough from above had caught his attention. "Samson, is that you?" His jaw dropped in disbelief. A statue, in the middle row to the left of the gate, was whipping his head back and forth to ward off a tenacious crow. His clothing hung in tatters. His skin was thoroughly burnt and peeling. Through the din of his companions, his determined wheezing splutters had cut through it all to reach the ears of his target. "By God! How are you still alive? I must have been gone almost 2 weeks!" Jack cried over the noise. The man's words came to him slowly and with great effort. "Mr. Jack, you promised. You promised. If I survived." That I did, Jack conceded. "Not to worry, Sam. I will ask the Queen as soon as I see her. A resilient man, such as yourself, deserves a place by Her Majesty's side." The man gave a great sigh of relief, and Fee feared he may have died on the spot. But as their carriage passed through the gate, he was back to desperately fending off the crows. Jack shook his head in amazement. "When we meet with the Queen, do me a favor and remind me about Samson. I'd hate for the man's life to end because of my forgetfulness." The screams of the statues gave way to the chaos of the city within. Not 2 feet past the gate, the carriage was swarmed by a sea of citizens. The people wore shabby clothes covered in filth. Their hands and faces were black with dirt and grime. Women reached towards the window, begging for coin, as children hurled small rocks at poor Morris before scampering away through the crowd. The throng of men bustled and boomed so densely that not a single person stood on solid footing. They shifted violently, the tightly packed bodies holding each other upright. "You better put your hood on," Peter said to Fee. The little girl pouted and made to cover her head. "You don't have to worry about it," Jack stopped her. "No one will bother you as long as you're with me." He leaned out the window, reaching into his pocket, and showered the people with coins of silver and copper. Waving enthusiastically, he watched them collapse in a mad scramble for the money. Peter returned to his seat, uninterested in a sight he was already familiar with. But Fee remained at the window, mesmerized. She had never seen so many people in one place before. There must have been thousands and thousands of them, lining the cobbled street, packed so close their faces were smushed together. A pudgy boy somehow pushed his way to the front, a folded piece of parchment clutched in his hand. Bending down, Jack took the sheet and handed the boy a copper piece, ruffling his hair. The boy disappeared as quickly as he came, creating a winding furrow in the crowd. Jack unfolded the note to read it as the carriage painfully inched its way forward, the citizens unwilling to give it way. "How are there so many people?" Fee asked. "Parsol is the largest city in Perona. It is the capital, after all," Jack answered, pocketing the note. "And it doesn't help that adoration seems to have just ended. Looks like everyone's trying to catch the first train back to whatever village they've come from." Fee's eyes followed the stream of people to its source. A towering building several blocks away had its brass double doors fully open as the citizens of Parsol were still flooding out. The building stood in the center of an open square. Flowing yellow banners depicting a rain dove flying through a blue triangle adorned its facade. The pewter bell in each of its 3 towers clanged jubilantly as families exited the temple. The plaza opened to 8 different streets, the people streaming out towards their homes. But the royal carriage had triggered quite the commotion and caused the masses to clot their path. The sanctuary of God was the place of worship for all Perona's inhabitants. Every day, the people of Parsal would congregate at the temple to send up their prayers in hopes of a divine response. Every day, they would wish the blessings of God upon all their neighbors, welcoming the response in kind. And every day, they would return home to their impoverished lives, unchanged. Peter peeked out at the holy temple, remembering the hours he spent in adoration with disdain. His mother had dragged him to service 7 days a week, a devout servant of God. The day he left home to attend the academy, with promises of daily prayer to soothe his mother's heart, was the last time he had set foot in its halls. Technically, the second last time, he reminded himself. Another child had made their way to the front, this time a skinny brown girl in a gaudy orange dress that was too small for her. Again, Jack bent down and the same exchange took place, before she too quickly disappeared. Peter watched as she cut through the current, her route revealed by the ripples in the crowd. And now that he had noticed, the ripples of several other children became plain as day, cutting a path towards the carriage between the legs of those above. Jack, it seemed, gathered his information from sources both high and low. The carriage finally broke through the last block of onlookers, Morris whipping the horses furiously to make up for the delay. Jack returned to his seat, as Fee took in the city's architecture, fascinated. Hobbled huts gave way to robust stone houses, which in turn led to 2-story chateaux built with bricks of many colors. As they approached the heart of the city, the dense roadway widened fourfold, allowing for all manner of foliage and artistry to be erected through the streets. A bronze tree bear guarded one woman's home as she watered azaleas in her front yard. She gave a joyful wave to the carriage as it passed. Fee tilted her head back, yanking her eyes away from the colorful little mansions to meet Peter's. "So which house is yours?" "It's not any of these," Peter snorted. "I don't think I'm even allowed to walk these streets." The little girl frowned, returning her sights to the beautiful homes. "I thought an important mage like you would live someplace fancy." "What gave you the impression I was important?" Peter chuckled. "These houses are all reserved for members of the Queen's ministry. Counselors, advisors, chiefs of staff. Our escort here probably has one himself somewhere. Eh, Jack?" Jack frowned as he read through his papers, the crease in his brow intensifying as he lingered on a dirty yellow sheet with a jagged scrawl. His mouth opened to speak, but he pursed his lips, weighing the words in his mind before trying again. "I have some regrettable news," he began. Peter picked his head up, and Fee turned in her seat. "I have been informed that the Queen is not currently within the city walls, and she is not planning to return for at least a couple days." "So we can leave then?" Peter asked pointedly. This detour had become a complete waste of his, and evidently Jack's, time. "If it were up to me, yes," Jack sighed. "But unfortunately, it is not. I've already sent word of your arrival, and preparations have been made to receive you. It will apparently be the young princess who will conduct your meeting." It was Peter's turn to frown. He knew nothing of the princess. The Queen had been pregnant with her when he had first left the city. It was said that every man, woman, and child in Parsol infested the streets the day she was paraded around the city for all to bear witness. But from all accounts, the young princess had not left the castle grounds since. "As for you, Fee, I'm afraid you will have to wait here in the carriage," Jack continued. Fee's immediate foul-mouthed protest was deflected by Jack's upheld hand. "Princess Abigail can be quite the terror behind her veil of cuteness, and I cannot allow you to draw back the curtains this time. Worse still, there's a chance she takes a liking to you, and that would cause a huge mess for everyone involved." Fee turned to Peter for support, but he only shook his head. "Honestly, Fee, it's probably for the best." The little girl crossed her arms, refusing to look at her 2 companions. Yet again, she bemoaned being treated like a child. "I've been taking care of myself for far longer than either of them," Fee thought. "Am I to be banned from every boring meeting?" Turning back to the window, she was startled to find the Queen's castle looming large above them. They found themselves in a walled courtyard. The carriage had crossed over a wide pebbled bridge and parked within the castle interior during Jack's announcement. No gate barred their way, only a gap in the foundation large enough for 4 carts to pass abreast. The courtyard was magnificently well kept. The stone pathway leading to the castle doors was unblemished, a single piece without crack. The vibrant green lawn to either side was uniformly cut, accentuating the grand topiary animals evenly placed about. Fee craned her neck to observe an emerald giraffe chomping down on the leaves of a bountiful apricot tree. Peter descended from the open doors of the carriage behind Jack. Although the sun still beat down on them, the wind had picked up slightly, causing him to hold his cloak close. As fascinating as the courtyard was, the overbearing castle was what caught his attention. Pristine white granite comprised its main body, contrasting with the charcoal slate along its trim. The conical roofs of its tall towers waved square red flags bearing the Queen's sigil. In fact, not a single wall was free of red banners streaming down their front. Titanic twin gust elephants guarded the even larger main entrance. The golden statues stood proud on either side. Their tusks, of what looked to Peter to be real ivory, were locked together above the doorway. Peter looked back at Fee, still sitting in the carriage. "I'll be back soon." "If you wait patiently, I'll show you the Queen's menagerie. You'll love it," Jack said. Fee just glowered, watching their backs enviously as the two walked away. She was determined not to give them the satisfaction of a response, when suddenly she remembered. Sticking her head clear out the window, she yelled, "Don't forget about that dying guy!" Jack gave her a thumbs up from the castle entrance, but to Peter he admitted, "I can't take him down without the Queen's approval. You figure he can last another couple days?" Peter did not. The castle's small foyer served as a mere antechamber with an identically large door at its other end. The setup ensured that anyone entering was forced to pass through the Queen's throne room. An attendant was standing at the door, clearly waiting for them. "The princess has been expecting you, Master Jack. You may join her for tea." Without waiting for a response, the man put his full weight into the heavy oak door, struggling to create a small opening. Jack nodded his appreciation, slipping sideways into the next room as Peter followed. He had only visited the castle once before, but the throne room was almost exactly as he remembered it. The vast chamber had numerous doorways connected to different areas of the castle, aligning its walls. Each door was of a different shape and color, giving clues to the rooms that lay beyond. The echoes of their footsteps against the marble tile rebounded off the coiling columns that seemed to touch the sky. Head craned, Peter was once again astounded by the glass ceiling high above, flooding the room with natural light. The throne itself sat at the far end of the room. It was made of white marble, with a scarlet cushion in its seat. Its high back spread outward to both sides, resembling large, circular ears. The armrests extended forward, 2 piercing tusks with razor-sharp points. Its sheer size would not be believed unless you saw it with your own eyes. The seat sat 8 feet off the ground, and was wide enough that their entire carriage would have fit on the cushion, horses and all. The Goblin King could invite his twin, and still have room for both their harems, Peter thought. He felt an involuntary shiver down his spine at the thought of the woman who was meant to fill it. Indeed, everything was the same as his last visit. Everything, except the small table set before the throne and the peculiar members positioned around it. The round table was covered in plates of scones and biscuits, patterned teacups, and a vase of orange chrysanthemums, all placed on top of a white doily. 3 chairs were positioned around the table, one empty, the second occupied by a little girl, her pigtails swaying as she talked animatedly, and the third with a sullen man staring down at the floor. The White Knight stood at the base of the throne, watching over the proceedings. As the Queen's left hand, he was responsible for the defense of whatever she valued most at the time. Dressed from head to toe in white steel armor, with a flowing ivory cape, he fit in perfectly with the decor of the room. His wizened face and sunken cheekbones betrayed the vigor in his soft blue eyes. At 9 feet tall, he towered menacingly over the party, hand resting over the 8-foot greatsword at his waist. Peter shivered at the sight of it. The legendary white steel blade, Soulheart. As he approached, it became clear that it was he who the little girl was talking to, and not the man in the seat across from her. Jack waited patiently for the girl to stop. She had definitely seen the two walk up and stand there at the edge of the table, but was pretending not to notice. Longer and longer she went on, the corners of her mouth betraying her smile. Only when fits of laughter started invading her speech did she finally turn to Jack to address him. "Yes?" she asked, her voice sugary sweet. "My dearest princess." Jack bowed low. "May I present to you Peter Prescott, the Bubble Mage?" Peter bowed too, but raised his head to find the princess's focus still directed at Jack. "Who's the most adorable princess you've ever met?" she asked. "But of course it is still you, Princess Abigail," Jack responded. "Naturally." Her voice rang through the chamber. "And which of you in this room is the most repulsive, slimy slug who doesn't even deserve to lick the dirt off my heels?" The nasty undercurrent of the jovial scene poked its head up above the surge. "And of course, that would be me," Jack again replied, a smile plastered to his face. Peter snorted. One look at the quiet man, now sniveling in his chair, told him exactly what the princess thought of Jack. "And would you?" she asked, incredulous, swinging in her seat to point her laced heels in his face. "If you were to wish it, I would be forced to oblige," he said. "Ew!" she squealed, giggling in her seat. Peter found the situation quite amusing, but the straight faces of the other men told him it was anything but. "You can go, Jack. My stomach grows sick at the sight of you." Jack bowed low once again before turning to leave. He clapped Peter's shoulder, wishing him luck, and left him alone. Peter stood awkwardly in his spot, his eyes shifting between the assembled cast, waiting for his cue. "Well, take your place then," the princess invited, gesturing towards the empty chair. Peter hesitantly sat opposite the princess as she blissfully sipped from her teacup. Chalky residue dotting her chin gave Peter the impression she had powdered her own face, the snowy mask juxtaposed against her rosy cheeks and cherry lips. Her leg swung idly under the table as she reached for another scone. The puffed-up sleeves of the yellow gossamer dress she wore were covered in crumbs. Between bites, her words fighting through food, she said, "You know, it's rude to show up at the tea party uninvited." Peter had nothing in response. He was invited. Why else would he be here? He looked towards the other guest at the table. The man still refused to make eye contact. Peter was confused to see a metal valve had been affixed to his chest. Sticking out through his shirt, it was set above a small silver spout, also protruding from beneath his clothes. Before he could contemplate what sort of fanciful fashion decision this was, Princess Abigail carried on. "But I won't complain. Sitting here all by myself becomes awfully boring. I could use the company. So, Peter, what business do you have with my mother?" Peter blinked. "Actually, it was Jack who invited me here on the Queen's behalf. I honestly have no idea what she wants with me." He made to take a sip of his tea to alleviate his awkwardness, but was met with an empty cup. "Typical. Mother doesn't tell me anything either, and yet I'm expected to run the kingdom while she's away." She took another sip from her teacup before quickly placing it down. "Goodness gracious! Where are my manners? Charles, fetch Peter his drink." The White Knight sprang to life from his solitary position and came around the table to take his cup. Peter could barely stammer his thanks. The White Knight was a legendary warrior of Perona. Peter remembered the many times in Parsol's gutters where he and his friends would take turns pretending to be the valiant hero, their sticks transforming into Soulheart itself before they cut each other down. The thought of the White Knight fetching his tea would make 10-year-old Peter wet himself. He looked around for a pot, but soon realized there were none present. Puzzled, Peter's eyes followed the White Knight back around the table before he stopped in front of the silent man. Getting down on one knee and stooping low, he placed the cup below the spout on the man's chest and loosened the valve. An audible groan escaped from the man as his blood began to pour through the spout and fill Peter's teacup. Peter watched horrified as the White Knight closed the valve and returned to present to him the filled cup. "Cheers!" Abigail grinned cheekily as she once again sipped from hers, her cherry lips darkening. Peter peered into the cup, his scarlet reflection staring back at him. The look of disgust would not leave his face. "Refill, please," Abigail called, shaking her empty teacup for the White Knight. Again, he took the cup and approached the silent man. Again, the man accepted his role without word. Blood flowed once more, this time trickling down at a much slower rate. Their cask was nearly drained. Taking the cup, the princess drank deep. Noticing Peter had not touched his yet, she reproached him sternly. "Have you never attended a make-believe tea party before? You have to pretend." Peter brought the cup up to his mouth and tilted it slowly. His lips firmly pressed against the ceramic, he counted to 3 before returning his cup to the table once again. "Mother won't allow me to drink alcohol yet," the princess explained, "so we simply have to improvise." Mother of the Year, Peter thought. "And Big Brother is still busy with his work on the council, so I'm all alone most days. My usual routine has gotten so boring, and every time I find something new and exciting to do, I end up breaking one of my toys." For the first time, the princess shot a sideways glance at the silent man. "Of course, I'd love to take in the city, maybe go shopping and get something to wear other than these gaudy dresses, but Mother has expressly forbid it. And Charles here is obstinate in his duty. Isn't that right, Charles?" She craned her neck over to the White Knight. "He's not as boring as he tries to be, you know." She leant in, whispering to Peter. "Once I tried to escape. I was halfway up Mother's apricot tree, ready to jump the wall, when he came rushing out and tackled me to the ground. Oh, the whipping I gave him afterwards was so much fun. But I wasn't too hard on him. He didn't have a choice, after all. Mother's punishment would have been much, much worse had I gotten away." Peter could only listen as the girl carried on incessantly. He eyed the biscuits on the table. His stomach murmured in anticipation, but he didn't dare take one. He could only imagine what repulsive confectionery would be paired with blood tea. The pastries sat innocently in their dish, icing sugar drizzled on top, concealing the flesh and bone that was probably hidden within. "Go ahead and take one then," Abigail sighed. Peter picked himself out of his reverie to face an irritated scowl. The idea of accidental cannibalism had taken him away from the princess's story, and she had noticed. "They're straight out of the oven." "I'm okay, really," Peter declined. "Don't be silly. I insist," she said. It was no longer an offer. Peter cautiously reached out and decided on a small, round biscuit with orange icing. Holding it between his fingers, he found the cookie was still warm. A moment of silence followed as he racked his brain for any excuse not to eat it, but under the princess's gaze, nothing came to mind. With a pained expression, he took a bite of the sweet. The pastry melted in his mouth, the soft dough crumbling with the most tender touch of his tongue. The icing sugar dissolved instantly, mixing with his saliva to envelop the biscuit in a sugary swamp. The taste was exquisite. Relief poured over him as he eagerly took another bite. With a contented smile, Abigail resumed her chatter. "As I was saying, you're the 5th candidate now to show up at our door, and not a single one of you seems to have any idea what Mother wants you for. I mean, collecting mages is wicked cool, in and of itself, but she certainly wants to use your abilities for some nefarious plot of hers." Peter coughed. The delicious treat he had so greedily consumed had formed a paste in his mouth, and he was finding it hard to get it down. "Obviously, I was able to send a couple of them away on the spot. I mean, the Whisper Mage? Honestly, what use would she have been? To be frank, even you seem pretty useless. You don't look strong or capable, and Bubbles can hardly be all that helpful in a fight. I guess you could just float away, but why would Mother care about that? Peter swallowed repeatedly. Little by little, and with great exertion, the pastry made its way down his throat, leaving his mouth very dry. Regardless, that spineless whelp brought you here personally, so I can't imagine Mother being too pleased if I were to dismiss you without meeting her first. She let out an exaggerated sigh. I suppose you'll just have to wait in the dungeons until Mother arrives. Peter spluttered, causing the princess to finally halt her diatribe. The conversation, if you could call it that, had taken a turn he was not at all happy with. Trying to speak, his voice wheezed as crumbs of dust were all that left his open mouth. Like a thirsty sponge, the biscuit had consumed all matter of moisture, leaving him to merely croak hoarsely. Abigail tittered excitedly, pushing herself to the edge of her seat to watch him struggle. Her eyes shone expectantly, as together they both realized his only available recourse. The princess had planned for this from the moment he had taken his first false sip. The solution was obvious, Peter thought, as his hands welled up under the table, but he knew he could not take it. To dash the conniving smirk from the princess's face would not bode well for him. In order to avoid the dungeons, there was no choice but to appease her. Taking his cup, he brought it towards his lips. This time, for real, he took 2 brief sips. The blood washed over his parched tongue, the metallic taste soaking in. Bitter and salty, Peter shivered in revulsion as he swallowed. Pushing thoughts of disease and infection from his mind, he let out a wet sigh of relief. Wonderful! The princess clapped her hands. Now, Charles, if you'll be a dear and escort Peter to his cell, I'd like to feed the mandrills before I take my nap. I can't stay here, Peter blurted out. Come on then, off you go. Abigail had turned in her seat at this point, instructing the White Knight over the back of her chair. I'll have Barty accompany me until you return, so you won't have to worry. Seriously, I have someone waiting for my return. I can come back another time. But Peter's pleas fell on deaf ears. The White Knight had rounded the table and placed a gloved hand firmly on his shoulder, the vice grip practically lifting him out of his seat. As he was steered away from the table, he could hear the princess humming to herself, an off-pitch melody of her own creation. Guided towards a handleless iron door adorned with heavy chains, he loudened his appeal. Princess Abigail, please, we can make a deal. I'll play with you, any game you want, until you go to bed. I can bring you alcohol, wine, real wine. He dug his feet into the ground, but the White Knight simply slid him along the floor. I can show you the city, take you outside the castle. Wait! Bring him back, Abigail cried across the room. Peter's heart beat fast against his ribcage, his face inches from the shackled door. He made his legs start again as they turned about, returning to the table. How am I going to pull this off? He thought, especially with her guardian looming over me. But every plan twisting through his mind unraveled at the princess's next words. It's rude to leave a tea party without finishing your drink. Peter's face blanched. Unable to move, the White Knight forced the teacup into his hands. The princess bounced in her seat, her face twitching with mirth at Peter's distraught appearance. It was these sudden falls, from the heights of hope to the depths of despair, that she craved more than anything in the world. She watched as he dipped a finger into the cup and brought it to his mouth. Like a child dipping their toes in cold water, she thought, it would do little to help when it came time to take the plunge. And what a child he was, standing there, sucking his thumb, prolonging the precious few seconds that remained for him above the ground. Growing impatient, Abigail clicked her tongue, and the White Knight bent down to guide Peter's arm up to his mouth. Helpless to defy the knight's strength, Peter took a deep breath and brought the cup to his lips, draining its contents in one gulp. The warm blood cascaded down his throat, lapping against every wall on its way to his stomach. He nearly gagged, doubling over where he stood, but the White Knight held him in place. The princess also doubled over, her laughter echoing through the chamber. "Take him away! Take him away! I can't stand the sight of such a pathetic man in my presence." The White Knight dragged Peter away, too sick to walk on his own. Abigail, wanting someone to share in her joy, turned to the only other thing left at the table. The man sat motionless in his seat, dead for the past 5 minutes. He must have died of laughter, she thought. Lamenting the fact that her cask was now expired, she savored the last long sip from her cup. Thanks for listening. A new chapter will be made available for free each week until the 10-chapter volume is finished. Or, if you're excited to read more, you can purchase the complete audiobook over at Audible right now, or the full ebook from Amazon, Kobo, and more. You could also support me via a direct donation at paypal.me/peterandfee, or most importantly, by subscribing to my Patreon over at patreon.com/peterandfee. My patrons will receive both the full ebook and audiobook on day one of their release, as well as exclusive behind-the-scenes insight episodes I create for each chapter. Furthermore, they will get first access to all my content and many other perks exclusive to them. I produce Peter and Fee entirely independently, so I would really appreciate your support in whichever way you prefer. If not, no worries. Please continue to enjoy the adventures, and hopefully, I'll be able to keep creating them for you. Next time, Chapter 6, Caught Red-Handed. Available Thursday, January 31st, 2019.